So welcome everyone to Abuzz about Amegilla Dawsoni, and it will be followed by an Ask Me Anything, where you can ask me any questions you have about Amegilla Dawsoni, native bees, conservation, PhDs, literally anything you want. So to start off with, I'm going to try and share my screen. Hopefully you can see that and not my 237 tabs open in my browser. PhD life. All right, so welcome to Abuzz about Amegilla Dawsoni. I'm Kit Prendergast, a native bee scientist. My Twitter is Bee Babette, and that's also sort of my stage name from when I performed at the Fringe World Festival, and I put native bees into the forefront for the popular audience. The Fringe is a festival of everything that's a bit fringy on the outskirts, and it's a celebration of art as well as community. So that was very exciting. G'day from the land down under. We've got a few international attendees, which is really exciting. So thank you. So I am almost Dr. Kit. I completed my PhD thesis and submitted it on August 2nd, and it is now under examination. It actually was examined, but they did a mistake with the examiners, and it had to get sent out again. So great times. Well done, university. That there is also my companion, Zephyr, and she is very supportive of my career. The poor thing puts up with being dressed in bee suits quite a lot. This is a tale of adventure and camaraderie, assisting Professor Steve Buzzman-Boochman and his partner Kay Richer. And these are amazing scientists that came over to Australia from Arizona to study our very special bee. So this research that I did was actually not part of my PhD. It was one of many diversions. I tended to do quite a few other things, but besides exactly what I was studying for my PhD, which is about, that's a title you can read, it's quite lengthy, but in gist, it's about the effect of urbanization on native bees and the impact of the European honeybee on our native bees and pollination networks. So I was quite a way into my PhD, and PhDs are a lot of work, and it was taking quite a toll on me. I also had a bit of a heartbreak, so I was in a bit of a sad, depressed state. And so Steve contacted me because he got in touch with me through another researcher, wanting to know about the Australian weather and what it was like, and where the bees were and when they might be active, because coming all the way from Arizona, you don't want to spend all that money to come here and find that it's downpouring and there's no chance of finding these bees. He only had, I think, 2 weeks here, so he was on a tight schedule. And so I was helping him out with the locations and checking the weather. And I was like, this is an amazing opportunity. I'm going to go on a solo road trip up to Carnarvon and study this amazing bee and, do something meaningful as well with my life. So why Amegilla Dawsoni? So Amegilla Azaropoda Dawsoni. It was first described in 1951 by Raymond, who described many, many bees. It's always been on my bucket list of bees to see. It's one of the biggest bees in Australia. Many of our native bees are very small, like less than a centimetre long. This one is about 2.5 centimetres long, up to that for the females. So it'd be nice to see one of the bigger bees that I can see without a microscope. It was one of the first native bees that I ever became aware of. So big confession, before I came up with my PhD about 10 years ago, so I came up with a PhD about 5 years ago, but about 10 years ago, I was completely ignorant of native bees, and I was mainly just knew that there was honeybees. There was probably some other bees like bumblebees that aren't in Australia, but yeah, completely ignorant, which is quite shocking. But I got introduced to this bee when we were studying alternative mating strategies in undergrad at UWA. So Amegilla dawsoni is quite interesting because there are two male morphs. There's the minor males and the major males. The major males are big and they wait at the mating grounds for virgin females to emerge. They'll battle it out to be the first one to mate with one of the females that emerges. Then there's the minor males, and they're much smaller, and they know that they have no chance of winning a battle against a major male. And these battles are intense. The males, like all male bees, don't have a sting, but they can tussle to the death. So the little minor males, they instead are a bit sneaky. They go to the flowers because the females, as soon as they emerge, they just want to have some nectar. So any females that escape this mating frenzy will go to the flowers, and then there's the little sneaky major males who'll be waiting for them, ready to mate with them when they go on the flowers. So this bee was sort of brought to international attention in a David Attenborough documentary, and David Attenborough is, of course, such an inspiration to all wildlife lovers. So that there is a photo I took of some of the major males having a little bit of a battle, and there's a map of where Amegilla dawsoni is based on ALA records, but it's almost certainly some of those records are incorrect because ALA is basically anyone can put a record on there. So that one down there in Southwest WA, that is almost certainly incorrect. So it's mainly in the Midwest of Western Australia. So I went on a solo trip up to Carnarvon. It took me 2 days because I had to stop off a lot to look at the wildflowers, because Western Australia is wildflower country. I went up in late July, early August. So this was like peak time when the wildflowers are starting to bloom. It was absolutely beautiful. So midway, I stopped off in Geraldton, stayed in a little caravan at Okabella Homestead, made friends with the baby lambs, and saw some feral goats on the way. So it was a beautiful trip, amazing scenery. So that was beautiful in itself. So first day, I am greatly indebted to a local Aboriginal woman called Tony, who is very passionate about these bees. They're part of her culture, and she showed me two of the sites where they were found. One was a nesting site, and where the bees were nesting, and another one, they were at the stage where they were emerging and mating. So these sites both weren't in, pristine national parks. One was at a rifle range, and another one was on a little off-road clay track going down to the beach. On my drive there, I also rescued a bobtail from being run over on the road. So that was my achievement of the day. For those who aren't from Australia or Western Australia, at least there's lots of bobtails all around. They're one of my favourite lizards, and I used to have a pet one, called it Boba Fett, of course. They're really cute little guys, but don't try this at home. I'm an experienced herpetologist, so if you don't pick them up right, they can definitely bite the end of your finger off. So yeah, not recommended. So day 2 is when I met Steve and Kay. Before I met them, I went on a morning jog. I go for a jog or a bike ride every single morning. Keeps me fit and healthy. And I saw some Amegilla foraging on their main host plant, Trichodesma, just on the side of the road. So that was really exciting. Off to a good start. I met Steve and Kay, and I was pleasantly surprised because, based on like the publicity of Americans and voting for Donald Trump and everything, my impression of Americans wasn't too favorable, but they definitely changed that. They were like the most loveliest people I've met, and they made me feel very welcome. And it was great to be able to talk bees all day to these like amazing people. So we sweep netted some bees at the site one, and I also saw a range of other native bees, which was amazing. Now day 2 was exciting because we made a new host record. So the Amegilla dawsoni had not been recorded foraging on Scaevola before. So we were breaking new grounds here, more bonking bees. So lots of photos and video footage of the bees making babies. And then there's another photo there of the males about to get into a fight for a female that was newly emerging. So we did lots of recording of the bees mating, and this was for scientific purposes. We wanted to see the courtship sequence and the mating duration. And we discovered that Amegilla dawsoni can mate for a very, very long time. Over 9 minutes was the record, so it was quite impressive. Day 3, more advancing the science of bee sex. So we wanted to make some recordings, and in particular of the sounds that they were making. So this is Steve's speciality, bee sounds, especially buzz pollination. He has some amazing equipment to record the sounds. But the issue was that it was very windy where we were, and so all he was picking up was wind. So he decided to record the bees mating in his ute. So my job was to collect the bees. So what happens is when a female emerges, a male jumps onto her, they scuttle off, the male piggybacking the female across the clay pan, then they go into some grass so that they can mate, you know, in secrecy and in private, except of course I stuffed that up and collected them, ran over to the car, put them in Steve's hat, and yeah, it went very well. That's a bit of scientific innovation for you. And during that day, there was also a detective at the pistol range when we were doing our research, and he was looking at some bones, which was a bit scary, especially being in a pistol range. But we think they were probably root bones, probably. And that there, the bigger photo, and that is of one of those little minor males mating with a female while she's trying to eat. Now, day 4, our objective was to record the female sonicating. This is Steve's speciality. As I mentioned, these are buzz pollinating bees. They vibrate flowers at a particular frequency, which allows the pollen to be released. Honeybees can't do this, but these guys are amazing at it. Well, they should be, but we found that they just wanted nectar, so they weren't sonicating. So that was a bit frustrating for Steve. All they wanted was some sugar. And so then we went to excavate some nests because Steve was doing some studies on the provisions of the nests and the microbes in them. So that was a bit of a workout for us because they do nest in clay pans, and it's amazing that these bees are able to dig tunnels in something that's very, very hard, and we were struggling quite a bit with our, human muscles using shovels. So it was a good workout for us that day. All of our field work was in beautiful scenery, so it was definitely not a bad place to be for sure. So the final day there, we attempted to record some more sonicating, but they were all just wanting nectar again. But we did find a new nesting aggregation. We had a record of another nesting aggregation, and we went to try and find that. And on the way, we found a huge nesting aggregation just on the road. And there's a little female peeking out of her turret. So that was great. The unfortunate part is that when we got to the location where the bees were supposed to be nesting, we saw absolutely no bees, no signs of nesting, and it looked like the road had been improved, but not improved from the point of the bees. So that was a bit sad. So that was our field work. Then that evening, to sort of say farewell to my American friends, I decided to introduce them to some Aussie culture, culture in inverted commas. So I took them to the local pub. This is Carnarvon. No offense for anyone that's from Carnarvon here. And it was very, very Aussie, very broken. All the guys were wearing their like flannel shirts and their Cobras and jeans. There was some bloke that was belting out AC/DC. Steve sang some American hits. I decided to be like very cliched Aussie and sing Waltzing Matilda, and like the people in the pub got up and started dancing, which was really really cute. So Steve and Kay had a great time, and it was a lot of fun. So then I had to go back home. So just before I left and hit the road, I went back to the clay pen where they were mating and did a little dance with the bees, said goodbye to them. You can see that they're very, you know, very cute, very docile. When the female's mating, she's got other things on her mind, so I can pick them up. And stopped off and saw more native bees of other species. So there was a great diversity throughout the whole trip. And then my final leg home after spending the night in Geraldton again, had to stop off to see more bees collected in near Pasiphae. There's only 2 species in this genus. The other one is one of the few bees that's got fortunate enough or unfortunate enough to be listed as endangered. We have many other bees that are probably just as threatened, but they haven't been listed. But fortunately, the other near Pasiphae has received some legislation. It looks a bit similar to this one. This is a male of the near Pasiphae mirabilis. You can see it's a very cool bee. So I had lots of fun memories from this trip, even though you know, it was an amazing experience. I was also happy to be reunited with Zephyr, and she was pretty happy too, as you can see. So everyone today will be getting a free ebook. I'll be sending you out an email with this book. It goes into more detail with more photos of Amegilla dawsoni. If you have any friends, family, colleagues, enemies that would like this book as well, let them know. And so here I've got to finish up with a little video of the bees mating. So very, very cute. All right. So that concludes my part on Amegilla dawsoni. And yeah, it's one of my favorite bees, and my aim is if once I get my PhD thesis and get to be Dr. Kit, I will get these tattoo of the Amegilla dawsoni mating on my shoulder. Don't tell my parents. All right. So now we've got the Ask Me Anything. So if you have a question, make sure you unmute yourself, or you can type it in the chat if you would prefer that.
Can you hear me, Kit?
Yes.
Tony Belton's my name.
Hi, Tony.
Hi, you were talking about legislation to protect that last bee that was in your clip. How can you protect native bees? Just is that to preserve their habitat through legislation, or are there other measures?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. Given that there's not much legislation, it's up to all of us to help native bees. So the first thing that we can do is to make sure that they've got enough food resources. So this is planting and retaining flowering vegetation, in particular native flora. because many of our native bees have co-evolved with the native flora of Australia. Our most diverse group, the Uroglossinae, almost all of them are specialists on native flora, especially the Metaceae and some of the Fabaceae and Eremophilas. So that provides them with the food habitat they need. Then there's the nesting habitat that they also really need. So these are bare ground. So Amegilla dawsoni, for example, nest in ground. The majority of bees actually nest in the ground. So not paving over things, not putting fake grass down, not putting layers of mulch or plastic weed coats on the ground. And then there's the cavity nesting bees. So we've got essentially 3 cavity nesting strategies. We've got the bees that use holes that are already present in the environment. These are the Megachili, most of the Halaean, and also some of the Uroglossines. And so in nature, they rely on little holes in wood created by wood boring beetles. So we need to make sure that we retain big trees, especially the big old trees. Even dead trees, they have holes. Like dead trees can actually be, very important habitat for lots of animals in general. And then we can help them out with bee hotels as well. So these are essentially replicating the nesting resources in nature. And you can make them by drilling holes in wood or using bamboo canes. And I've got a book about bee hotels that you can email me about, called Creating a Haven for Native Bees, which also has a big list of the best flora for native bees. So those are the local scale things. Then at bigger scales, we need to make sure, of course, that we preserve native vegetation, no more land clearing, and revegetating areas. That's really important. And then at larger scales, of course, there's the global threat of climate change, which threatens native bees through causing their thermal range to no longer be appropriate where they are, causing mismatches in the phenology of the host plants and the bees. So bees aren't active the whole year. For example, Amegilla dawsoni is only active July, August, maybe the start of September. And so if its host plants aren't blooming when it emerges, then it's not going to have any food to forage on, and conversely, the host plants won't get pollinated. And in Australia in particular, we've been seeing increasing droughts and bushfires, which are quite devastating for native bees. So to address these conservation threats, we can do things to reduce our carbon footprint. One of the most effective things is to go plant-based in your diet. You can cut your carbon footprint by 50% just by going plant-based, which has a multitude of other benefits to the environment. And then there's things like reducing air travel, which we're all doing very well at the moment during these COVID times, and reducing fossil fuel use. And then there's the converse side of planting more trees, reducing land clearing to increase carbon storage. So those are some of the conservation things for bees. When it comes to particular species, then we'd have to look at their particular nesting substrates and floral resources to make sure there's enough there for them. And sort of associated with that enough floral resources is making sure that there's not competition from European honeybees. So keeping honeybees at sustainable levels in the environment, and probably not putting them in national parks, because that should be for wildlife, and European honeybees are essentially a domesticated species like cows, which also shouldn't be in national parks. So great question, and hopefully you've got some ideas there on what you can do to help the native bees. We've got a few questions in the chat, so I'll go through and answer some of those. Don, 9 minutes, are you sure the mail had not expired? Yeah, he was still alive afterwards, but yeah, it was definitely quite an impressive performance. Now, from Matt, he said, what are your plans now that you have finished your PhD? So the ideal plan would be to get a postdoc, and I have multiple ideas of what I would love to study, because that's the great thing about native bees. There is so many ecological questions you can ask for them, and there's so much research to do. So one of the projects that I would love to do is actually looking at the effect of fire on native bees, because this has not been studied in Australia, and I've written 2 grants which haven't been successful. I'm in the process of writing another one. So there's a bushfire recovery grant by the federal government, but they were very much more interested in recovering koalas than native bees. Koalas are very cute and cuddly, and of course they're vertebrates, whereas native bees, they're small, the diversity is almost overwhelming. So that's one thing I'd like to do. I'd also like to study the impact of certain pesticides on our solitary Australian bees, because there's been quite a lot of research on pesticides on honeybees, but almost nothing on native bees, especially not in Australia. So I think that's something that would be important to look at, to provide some management guidelines to farmers. I'd also like to look at the effect of livestock grazing on native bees, and how this alters their species composition, and how we can improve agricultural landscapes for native bees. And my key passion, I guess, is bees in urban areas, because this is such a underrepresented topic, and lots of people tend to assume that bees, urban areas are sort of like for humans, and then the wild places and also, crop fields are where bees are. But my research has shown that in Southwest WA at least, but also when I've done like looking at a review of urban areas across the world, urban areas do have the huge potential to support native bees. But the key thing is to make sure that we retain native vegetation around the suburbs. So that's another thing that I like to look at. Those are what I'd like to do. At the moment, I'm also doing some stuff that I'm really passionate about. So I'm doing some surveys for DBCA, which is Department of Biodiversity Conservation Attractions, surveying some sites in the Perth Hills for native bees, and I'm absolutely loving that. It's a beautiful place to be. And doing some surveys for some of the local councils as well of their bushland. So if you know of any local councils in Western Australia, I'd love to help them out in discovering what native bees are there. And then I've been doing various bee talks and bee workshops. So that's what I've been doing in addition to becoming a circus performer. So always got a backup plan there. Now, Tessa, are there any regular bush blitzes out there for these or other native bees? Not as far as I know, targeting the native bees. I would love to be involved in a bush blitz. I do know that there have been some in sort of the desert areas of Australia, where some of my colleagues like Remco, he has been doing some great work there, discovering some native bees. Yeah, I would love to be involved in a bush blitz. As far as I know, there haven't been any ones targeting these native bees, but the bush blitz have been very successful in finding new bees and new discoveries. And there was a paper published on one of the bush blitzes where they discovered some new, I think it was Eurygosline bees. So yeah, it's a good thing that. From Andrea, with WA agriculture, but are these bees important to pollinate fruit trees and other farm plants for good? So Amegilla dawsoni, no, but there are native bees, even though many of them are specialised on the native flora, there are native bees that are generalists that pollinate crops. So the Extenura, other Amegilla species that are generalists, they're really good at pollinating tomatoes, and quite a few halictids. They are pollinators of some crops, and I did some research in Tasmania apple orchards, and even though honeybees and bumblebees as well were the main visitors, there were Extenura were quite frequent visitors to the apple blossom, so they're another good one. And then over on the East Coast, the tetragonula, they're being used for pollination services of quite a few things like blueberries and macadamia and things like that. How prevalent is that honeybee hives are placed in national parks? So they are quite prevalent because national parks are where many of the trees that beekeepers like to use for honey, so karri, jarrah, marri, those sort of things, leatherwood in Tasmania, and they can be at quite high densities. And as far as I know, there's no regulations on how many hives there are allowed to be, which I think there should be. And then, of course, this is compounded by also the number of feral honeybee colonies, of which there are a lot. Like almost every time I do a survey, I find a feral honeybee colony, which is quite depressing because they're also, when they're feral, they use the hollows that native parrots and possums require. Okay, the impacts of herbicides and pesticides on native bees must be quite significant. Well, we don't know. So different herbicides can be good or bad in that if they're used to clear invasive grasses, that is excellent, and they do very good for native bee conservation. If they're being used to destroy flowering resources, then and just create a monoculture of a exotic crop, then that's bad. When it comes to pesticides, it depends on the pesticide and the dose. It hasn't been studied on native bees. So some pesticides are targeted at specific pests, they're very specific, and so they would have no effect on native bees. And even a beneficial effect, because by increasing the yield of the crop, you don't have to clear as much land, so there's more land for wildlife. But then there are systemic pesticides that do harm the native bees. So again, it's something that really needs to be studied, and there's no sort of clear answer to that. Now, native bee hives in domestic gardens. So the majority of native bees are solitary, so they don't live in hives. We've got tetragonula and Ostroplebeia, which are colonial bees that do live in colonies and can be kept in hives, not in where I am in southwest WA, but in other parts of Australia. And I think they're fine. Again, because they are colonial bees, I guess you'd have to make sure that the density isn't too high, so they're not taking all the resources up, so that there's some left for the solitary bees. But if it's between honeybees and native bee hives, then definitely native bees. Plus, these native bees are stingless, so there's no health risks there. The drawback is, like, if you want kilos of honey, they only produce like a jar a year. But there are plenty of beekeepers who rely on beekeeping for their livelihood. So support the beekeepers, I think, who need this income rather than keeping a hive in your backyard with potential negative consequences. A compliment from Dan, so thank you for that. And from Don, thank you. Now, what are the life cycles of both male and female Amegilla dawsoni? And did you say they're only active outside their nest in spring? Yes, so the Amegilla dawsoni, they emerge, the males emerge first, late July, then the females emerge, the males mate with the females, and then the females, they build their nesting burrows, provision them, lay their eggs, and then seal the nest, and then they die. And this is the life cycle of most solitary bees. So they're only active a couple of months of the year. The rest of the year, the adults are dead, and the population exists as larvae in the nests. And from that, yes, I do lots of fun and exciting things. So yes, I was wondering if you know of any other species that have similar mating strategies with minor and major males. Lassieglossum hemichelseum. Yes, so Lassieglossum hemichelseum is even more unusual in that it's got the major males actually have these like massive heads, and they stay underground. So that's a very unusual strategy there. There are other bees overseas that have these mating strategies, and Steve was telling me about bees in Arizona where the mating battles between the males can be extremely intense, and you can get balls of like 50 males all fighting among each other. So that's quite exciting. We don't know of that many of the sexual the dimorphism between the males in Australia. There are I think Hylaeus alcyoneus. There's I've noticed at least there's like variation in the size of the males, but whether they've got alternative mating strategies, I would have to look into that. But yeah, it's a very, very interesting mating system, and it's been studied quite a lot. So if you go into Google Scholar and search Amegilla dawsoni male mating, you might come up with quite a few cool papers. If you're not able to access them, which is sad because publishers do that, you can either email the author. There's usually like their email address there to contact them, or there's this thing called Sci-Hub, which is amazing, which is basically like Pirate Bay for scientific articles, and it's letting people everywhere have access to science, which I think is wonderful. Yeah. All right, we have 1.5 minutes left because Zoom only allows me to have 40 minutes when it's a group meeting. So if you have any further comments, this is your last chance, or you can email me if we run out.
Kit, I'm not quite sure. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Ros Hewson.
Hi, Ros.
I have the Leioproptis come in once a year.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, the bee. I want to learn a lot more about it, so I don't know whether to email you and pick your brain that way. But what I would like to say is I appreciate what you do, and I know a lot of other people do. They're only just learning like me, and you are so supportive, and your time you just give so freely. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much. That's really wonderful. I really appreciate your feedback. Yeah. I'm blushing now. Thank you. And if you have any further questions, feel free to email me. I'm always happy to share more information about our native bees. And also just letting you know that I have a little quest to find Australia's favourite bee species. So I can send you all the link